Welcome into the 24/7 Sports College Basketball Show. I'm your host, Adam Finkelstein, and this week we are wrapping up preseason previews. We've already done 4. Make sure you check out the 24/7 Sports channel to get the very best in the Big East, the ACC, the SEC, and the Big Ten. But today it is Big 12 day, and back to join me is CBS Sports and 24/7 Sports Isaac Trotter. Isaac, welcome to the show.
Let's do this thing. One more, right? The Big 12, maybe the best league in college basketball. It's up there with the SEC this year.
That was my question. But before we get going, everybody, make sure you like, share, subscribe, do all those things you do. As far as the Big 12 goes, I think it certainly could be the best conference in college basketball. So we're going to do this the same way we always have. We're going to start with tier 1. These are Isaac's tiers, and he's got these impossible national championship contenders. Now, for everyone who saw the Big 10 show, he didn't have one team in the Big 10 as a national championship contender. Isaac, how many natty chip contenders are there in the Big 12?
A whole lot more than one. I got 5. If this league, I think at the top, it can go toe-to-toe with anybody. I think there's 5 teams that could win it. I think there might have a case for 2 more to elevate into this tier. So this league is absolutely jam-packed at the top of the league.
All right, let's start with Houston. Kelvin Sampson. It is a new day in that program. Obviously, Jamal Shead is gone. We said the same thing about Marcus Sasser the year before, but a little bit of a different identity, but you still have really high hopes and belief in this program. They are atop your national championship contenders. Tell me why.
I think this group actually might be better than they were last year. I think there were times where they kind of ran out of gas toward the end of the year with injuries. This year, they're fully healthy. Healthy Terrence Arsenault is back. You're getting a healthy JoJo Tugler off the bench. So the bench depth is already better. And then I'm just bullish on these teams with retention. We know what the non-negotiables are with the Houston club. They're going to offensive rebound. They're going to play great defensively, try to turn you over. While everyone's passive, they're going to be aggressive defensively. And I actually think offensively, there's a little bit more juice here. They're going to shoot more threes with LJ Cryer coming back and Emmanuel Sharp continuing to take another step. I think Milos Uzan, I'm really bullish on him picking up these defensive schemes, really insulate him into this mix really well. And again, last year we were talking about him as a potential breakout guy for the NBA draft. I think he's a little bit of a post-type sleeper here. I think he's going to be a excellent set-the-table point guard, distributing the basketball. And there's going to be, I think there's 364 Division I teams in college basketball. I literally think JoJo Tugler would start for 363 of them. For Houston, he comes off the bench, and he's going to be awesome this year off the bench as a 6'7", just hyperactive defensive forward. Everybody wants forwards that can guard multiple positions. Houston has like 3 of them.
JoJo Tugler is stupid long. Like, I remember his USA basketball days. I want to say it's like somewhere between a +7 and a +9 wingspan. Ridiculously long. Plays so much bigger than he is. He was actually in the starting lineup in that opening exhibition over Texas A&M. I'm fascinated to see if he comes off the bench because it's like the ultimate changeup, just who can infuse such energy. I mean, think about college basketball's Ben Wallace. That would be the example I would give for JoJo Tugler. And you made the point about Terrence Arsenault. This is someone who NBA scouts are telling me they're very intrigued by so far this year. So I love all of it. I will also add Houston top 10 defense in the country for 4 years in a row. I believe they're going to be better offensively. And I get, like, when you're playing for Kelvin Sampson, you're going to be good defensively. I just wonder if they can be quite as good without Sasser or Shead back there, but we're going to find out. Certainly a national championship contender until somebody proves otherwise. All right, we're going to keep it moving. Number 2 on this list, and I should add the team that I believe is the tops in the Big 12 right now, and that is Kansas. Now, they are coming off a loss to Arkansas in an exhibition game, which, frankly, I don't think meant very much because they were missing a handful of guys, including Hunter Dickinson. But Trotter, what is it about this group that makes them a national championship contender beyond the obvious?
Yeah, for me, I just think that the additions that they've added have really shored up the huge areas that they needed. They needed more catch and shoot 3-point shooting, so they go get a Rylan Griffin. They needed more wing scoring, so they get an AJ Storr. They needed a middle of the floor shot creator, so they go get Zeke Mayo. So I think the defensive identity is probably always going to be there with DeJuan Harris at the point of attack and KJ Adams kind of flying around and shutting down fires. But when you also have a Hunter Dickinson post-up threat, and you also have this wing scoring, and you also have the rim pressure, and you also have these catch-and-shoot threes, and you have an X's and O's coach like Bill Self, it just feels like a really good combination here for this group to be excellent offensively. I don't know if this has like a top 10 defense ceiling. Like I don't think this team has a ceiling to be a top 10 defense with Hunter Dickinson at center, just with some of his issues and pick and roll coverage. But I do think this group can be top 20. And if you're top 20 defensively with an offensive ceiling like this, like you're going to be a national title contender.
I actually thought they were a national championship contender last year. We forget they beat UConn at home before injuries really got to them. I think the one guy maybe we're not yet talking quite enough about is Zeke Mayo. I've heard that they're really pleased with him in the beginning. Talk about the shooting he's bringing them. He's in a position to start, and then DeJuan Harris is just, in my opinion, the most reliable point guard in college basketball. He and KJ Adams, they not only have continuity, they have like role definition on that team. Everybody knows what their job is. And I just think when the ball is in Harris's hands, you get a great chance to win every night. All right, let's keep it moving. We're going to go Iowa State, another national championship contender. Talk about returning guys. They returned 3 big ones. This is a big 3 if there ever was one, Trotter.
No, this is huge, right? Getting Taman Lipsey back, getting Keyshawn Gilbert back, and getting Milan Momcilovic back. Momo is what they call him over there. Like they got just a lot of offensive pop that they haven't necessarily had in the past. But I think that defensively, this is where TJ Otzelberger's bread is buttered. This group is still going to be awesome on that end. The one thing I love with Iowa State is, they play random defense. It's Taman Lipsey, it's Keyshawn Gilbert. You're dribbling the ball up the court, and then all of a sudden, one of them are just breaking defensive rules to go immediately double team somebody. It's awesome stuff that they're able to do. They take the ball away at a high level. And keep an eye on some of these newcomers that they've added. Nate Heisey out of Northern Iowa, a complete winning player who checks off every box for what they want out of a role player. Josh Jefferson, I think, is one of the top 50 defenders in college basketball. He is the most talented big man that Iowa State's had in their program under Otzelberger. And then Deshaun Jackson, another transfer out of Charlotte. Charlotte transfers have continued to level up at the high major ranks. We saw that with Bryce Williams last year at Nebraska. We've seen that with Ali Khalifa last year at BYU. I think Deshaun Jackson's going to be a really helpful big man for this Iowa State club. So they have retention, a little splash of newcomers. They got more scoring than I think they have. This group has a lot of ceiling to be, one of the best teams in college basketball from the jump.
Let me ask you this. You've got Momo projected to start at the 3 for them. This is a program that you alluded to it, the amount of trapping and kind of random schemes that they like to throw at you to surprise the other team and keep them off balance. Number 1 defense in the country last year, number 2 in both turnover percentage and steal percentage. So this is a team that looks to attack and force turnovers. Can they do that with Momo at the 3? Because as good as he is offensively, he's not exactly swift of foot. So I guess my question is 2-part. Can they do that with him at the 3? And how often do you expect him to go to the 4 to kind of open up more of that attacking defensive playbook?
Yeah, this is a bet on Josh Jefferson, honestly. He's 6'8" and 220. I think he's the guy that will take some of those big wings. I think they can be really flexible with Momo, having him potentially guard maybe the least, skilled offensive player on the floor and maybe hide some of his things because they just need his pop, right? Offensively, they need that guy who can, make tough shots against some of these set defenses. If they're elite defensively, I think it's Jefferson's ability to, hey, I'm going to guard a 4 one night, and the next night, when BYU comes down, maybe I'm guarding one of these big wings, or when Kansas comes to town, maybe I'm guarding AJ Storr, stuff like that. So I don't think necessarily detractor because of the other additions that they've added. Although I will say one thing that they've noticed with that group early, their lateral quickness up front is not the same as it was last year. I think that's a real point of emphasis for them moving forward in roster building.
All right, let's talk about Arizona. They continue to play stellar basketball year in and year out. And I know sometimes the postseason results haven't been there, but this to me looks like a roster that is again poised to contend. Now, the Big 12 is going to be vastly different than the Pac-12 or the Pac-10 or whatever it used to be before it died its premature death, although apparently it's back. What are the expectations for Arizona this season?
Elite, right? They want to be elite, and they want to do it with the same recipe as well. What have we seen from Tommy Lloyd? They want to be awesome in transition, and they want to be awesome on the glass. I think this group can do a lot of those things well. And I think defensively, We've talked about Duke. We've talked about Houston. We talked about Iowa State as a potential team that could be number one in defense. I think Arizona could be number one in defense as well. Jaden Bradley, excellent at the point of attack. KJ Lewis, excellent switchable guard. They have a huge shot blocker on the back end in Matias Krivas, 7'2", 265. He's one of my favorite breakout candidates. Trey Townsend can guard multiple positions. Carter Bryant, we've seen him as another big long forward. Toby Awaka, just a brick house in the middle of the floor when he checks in. So they have a lot of answers to the test defensively. Late clock shot making, that's where Caleb Love is going to have to step up. I'm a little curious about the 3-point shooting as well. That's where Campbell transfer Anthony Delorso is going to have to be a big part of the solution there.
I'm a little curious about backcourt depth. I feel like a lot of this is on Caleb Love to play well, and he's been so hot and cold. I mean, there's just such extreme variability in his performances. Like when he's not making shots or it's not clicking, like there's just not a whole lot of bodies there in the backcourt. It also makes me a little nervous about their ability to survive injuries. Again, we hope that never happens, but it's the reality of the college basketball season, especially in a conference like this where every night is going to be a war. So real quick, is that a concern for you?
Totally. Yeah, it absolutely is. And that's where some of the offseason losses have come into play. Josan Sannon, he was committed there and bounces to Arizona State. And then Kylan Boswell, he was legitimately a big part of that team. He ends up transferring to Illinois. It could end up being a big X factor if Arizona doesn't reach its postseason ceiling.
I will say I do expect a good year from Jaden Bradley. People forget he was the best point guard in high school basketball just a couple of years ago. He knows how to run a show. He's got great positional size, good feel for the game. The team is clearly his to run this year. I expect he'll respond. All right, let's go to Waco, Texas, and Baylor, where Scott Drew, according to multiple reports, turned down the opportunity to go to Kentucky this year and in exchange got a much more significant NIL investment from the program. Obviously, you got a new facility there as well. VJ Edgecombe is there after choosing Baylor over both Duke and Kentucky, and they have a couple of big-time transfers in Jeremy Roach and Norchad Omier. What do you make of this team?
Offense, offense, offense. If Arizona's backcourt depth is a problem, Baylor could have loaned them one or two of these extra guards. Like I think one thing we're going to see with this Baylor group, though, is Matt Norlander actually brought this up in his top 101 teams on CBS Sports. Really great piece. But Baylor looks like they're going to go really small. Jeremy Roach at the 1, Jaden Nunn at the 2, Langston Love at the 3, and VJ Edgecombe at the 4 with a 4-guard lineup surrounding Norchad Omier. That's not one guy over 6'7", but good luck keeping them out of the paint. Like all of those guards have major juice. Rob Wright is another freshman I'm really bullish on as his chance to potentially help out this group. So this is going to be one of the best offenses in college basketball. And I'm really looking at two guys that are kind of under the radar. Jalen Celestine, the transfer out of Cal. Can he continue to make catch and shoot threes? He was over 40% on them last year at Cal. And then Josh Ojianwuna in the middle. There's going to be some opportunities for him to play at the 5, move Norchad Omier to the 4. If he can give them some rim protection, that might be just enough defensively. But this group will go as far as its offense takes them. They have a cavalry of guards, and they might be the best offense in college basketball next season.
All right, now we talked about how Houston has been top 10 in the country in defense for 4 straight years. Guess what? Baylor has been top 10 in the country in offense for 4 straight years. And I think to your point, there is plenty of firepower to do it again. The thing that I worry about slightly is a little bit of a trade-off. And this was something that they talked about, Norlander and Parrish talked about on the Iron College Basketball podcast. And I think it's a fair question, is the 5 spot. Like, can Omier and Ojanwunu, did I say that right?
Ojianwuna.
Yeah, close. All right, not bad. Can those guys play at the same time? Because if they do, Baylor doesn't have the floor spacing that they typically like. So my question to you is, do we worry about rim? Does it become a scenario where we are choosing between rim protection and floor spacing?
It does. And if I have that, I'm picking the floor spacing because I think offense wins championships in 2024. And I think the other thing too with Baylor, they haven't had a 5-out center in a minute. I think that even hyper focuses this offense where they just go from a really, really good to like a different level offensively when you have a 5-out center. So I'm going to pick the 5-out center literally every time.
And obviously they've got shot blocking off the bench if you need it. And if you watch that Big Ten preview, you know that I'm going with the teams who can score the ball. Baylor can always score with the ball. All right, let's talk about tier 2. And these are the teams that Trotter deems the top 25 caliber rosters. He's got Texas Tech, he's got Cincinnati, he's got Kansas State, and he's got BYU in this group. Now in the Big 12, The top 25 teams are also teams that I think clearly have second weekend potential in the NCAA tournament. Let's start with Texas Tech, Trotter. This is a group that you hear some people that are very enthusiastic about, but I would say of every team in this conference, maybe it's Texas Tech that has like the widest range of projected outcomes. Where are you kind of on that curve?
I'm super bullish on them. I think they might be a top 15 team nationally. I love the additions that they've made. You know, Darian Williams, though, getting him back is enormous. But I like the way that they can play in different ways. And Grant McCaslin is kind of a chameleon. He finds ways to win defensively at North Texas, found ways to lean on offense last year in his first year at Texas Tech. And they can do a lot of different ways this year. You know, I think the Elijah Hawkins addition, he's one of the best passers in college basketball, spraying it out to big time shooters like Chance McMillian, Kerwin Walton, Darian Williams. That makes a lot of sense to me. But they also have a cavalry of bigs inside too. JT Toppin, the transfer out of New Mexico, is a complete stud. Federico is just solid at the 5, but keep an eye on Devin Cambridge as well. He's a 6'6", 3-4 combo wing that can really give them more rim protection and also like some like some verticality offensively. Like you could throw it near the square and he can go get it. I think there's gonna be chances where he plays the 4 with JT. And then they just have so much depth. Like Christian Anderson is a freshman that's really improved. Kevin Overton, the transfer out of Drake, he really insulates them defensively. You know, Elijah Hawkins has been, kind of killed by big guards this year. Kevin Overton is going to be a guy that actually guards a lot of those type of caliber guards in the Big 12. So I think Texas Tech has a lot of different avenues to win. They would be my favorite pick out of this group in Tier 2 to elevate into Tier 1 if everything clicks into place.
I think Kevin Overton is the best player that nobody is talking about. Went to Drake last year, played for DeVries. DeVries leaves for West Virginia. I'm sure they wanted to bring him with them to West Virginia because, in my opinion, he was a high major prospect coming out of high school. He did a post-grad year at Sunrise Christian. And guess what? This Texas Tech team has 2 former Sunrise Christian coaches on their coaching staff. So they got him to come to Texas Tech instead of going to West Virginia. I've heard great things about him in the preseason. Everything you said about him defensively was totally accurate. Here's the other thing I'll add. This guy, when he wants to be, is a bucket. He can flat out score the basketball. I think Kevin Overton is going to be one of the key swing players in the Big 12 this year. All right, let's keep it moving. We're going to go to Cincinnati, where Wes Miller has what I believe is pretty clearly his most talented team yet. Where, as you look at the starting lineup you've got projected here, Trotter, where do you fall on that? Do you think this is Wes's best team yet?
This is awesome team. Like this is an awesome team. The thing I love about Cincinnati is you talk to some people in that league last year, they would tell you that Cincinnati was as physical as any team that they played in the conference. And I think their physicality is going to be even better this year. They are legit 10 or maybe 11 deep. And offensive rebounding, they were great at it last year. And rim protection, they were great at it last year. And they go get Dylan Mitchell, who will help out with both of those aspects of the floor. So I love the additions that they've had. I love the retention as well. Jizzle James and Day Thomas, I think, are going to take steps for them at point guard. Dan Skillings is an awesome player that a lot of people don't necessarily know about. And then keep an eye on Connor Hickman, the transfer out of Bradley, just a complete winner. He can make threes. He can play on or off the ball. He's a terrific defensive player who is under, a really, really good defensive scheme. I think he finds a way into this closing lineup for a Cincinnati group that I just think has, so many answers to the test, but it starts with the physicality. They are going to beat you up every single night.
I'm excited to see what Dylan Mitchell looks like in this uniform, especially if it's the throwback uniforms. Do you ever have those shorts, Trotter? I grew up buying those shorts at the mall. The old Cincinnati shorts, like in the Bob Huggins days. We got to get those back. Anyway, moving on. Dylan Mitchell, he was obviously a 5-star prospect coming out of high school. He goes through 2 different coaches at Texas. He's there for Chris Beard. It turns to Rodney Terry midway through his freshman season. Never really got it going, but I've said this from day one, and this is not a criticism of anybody who's ever played for. Dylan Mitchell is someone like, yeah, he's got to shoot it better, but when you've got that kind of athleticism, you've got to be able to weaponize that athleticism within what you do offensively. He's not the same kind of player as Andre Jackson was, but if you remember how Dan Hurley used Andre Jackson 2 years ago, like there was a point in the season where people were daring him to shoot. He shot, it didn't go well. and Hurley tweaked things, and all of a sudden he's got him out of the dunker spot. He's got him out of short rolls. He's doing different things to get him downhill, to get him lobs. If you can steal Dylan Mitchell a lob or two a game, it's going to open up his confidence. You can get him out in transition, and all of a sudden he's a much different player than the guy who sometimes had 6 points and 4 rebounds per game last year at Texas. So I'm very interested to see what he turns into under Wes Miller this year. I think, again, that would be a player that I would call a swing player on this roster. Could really help to take it to another level. All right, let's keep it going now at Kansas State. And we look at this roster. Doug McDaniel, I'm hearing a lot of good things. They've got another undersized kind of spark plug guard that they like down there. Is he Marquise Noel level, Trotter?
We'll see. I think the one thing I like about Doug McDaniel is just the speed. This roster construction is a little curious. There's a lot of forwards and bigs. It's a big bet on Doug McDaniel being awesome and giving them, a guy that can get 2 feet in the paint and can create some of those long closeouts. I think there's been a lot of discussion about Coleman Hawkins playing the 3 and, is that going to work? He actually did that a lot last year at Illinois when they had Dane Danger and Ty Rodgers on the floor at the same time. So it's not going to be that much of a surprise to me. I think I like them defensively, though. Jerome Tang was one of the architects of that Baylor defense that was awesome. Baylor's defense has taken a step back without him, and we see what they do defensively every year at Kansas State. They contest shots at a really high level. It's hard to make threes against them. I think their court coverage is going to be great. David Gasson is a phenomenal defender at 6'9" who can fly across the floor. Hawkins, 6'10", can fly across the floor. Achor, 6'9" and super mobile. So I think their court coverage defensively is going to be really, really good. It's a big bet too on Brendan Housen, the transfer out of Villanova, knocking down catch and shoot threes and off movement threes, and Max Jones as well, another transfer that they need him to be able to make shots, because I don't think the volume from 3-point range is definitely going to be there. So when they take threes, they got to make them. And that's, that's Doug, that's Brendan Housen, that's Max Jones, that's Coleman Hawkins. Those guys have to continually be knocked down guys from 3-point range, or we're going to see a pretty crowded, paint from opposing defenses when they play Kansas State.
I think this is going to be a better shot blocking team than we saw last year. They weren't in the top 100 in shot blocking percentage, but with Ugana and Yenso joining there, they have a real rim protector. The thing I worry about defensively is this is not a very switchable team, especially when you've got Hawkins out there. I mean, Doug McDaniel's generously listed at 5'11". I don't think he's 5'11". But if you've got Ugana out there with Nagusin and Hawkins and Doug McDaniel, I mean, maybe you scramble a little bit, but you're going to want to keep Onyenso away from the basket. You're not going to want to allow McDaniel to get posted. So, I mean, to me, this is not a very switchable group. So they're going to have to figure out other ways to do it. Anything quick on that before we move on?
Yeah, no, I think this is going to be a really passive defense. I think they're going to play a lot of drop coverage, and they're going to try to play 2 to the ball, and they're going to try to force a lot of tough 2s. And if that recipe works, I think it will. And if they can take away a lot of 3s, I think they will. They'll try to do that well. Like, I think basically the big part of Kansas State defense is that they're going to try to give up as few 3-point attempts as possible.
All right, the last team in your tier 2, meaning top 25 caliber roster, and that's BYU with new head coach Kevin Young. Of course, Mark Pope there. Last year, I thought did a great job. Now he's at Kentucky. This is a program that shot more 3s than they shot 2s last year. Obviously, I think Kevin Young going to have a little bit of a different philosophy. Listen, let's just call it what it is. BYU is now pretty much known to have a lot of buying power in the world of NIL, and they got a big one in Igor Demin, who NBA scouts are very intrigued with. Kanan Catchings, another high-profile freshman on that roster. My question to you, Trotter, is when you look at the veteran pieces around those 2 youngsters, and let me be clear, I think Demin is going to be ahead of Catchings. What do we need to know about the veterans, and is there enough there to support these young guys?
I think there is. Dallin Hall was a complete stud. I think, Kentucky could really use a Dallin Hall if he had hit the transfer portal and ended up there. That'd have been really helpful. But I like the bigs too. I like how Fus Traore kind of gives them a ground bound, like, hey, back to the basket post-up threat. And then they can bring in Keba Keita, the transfer out of Utah, who is just 6'8", chiseled, and is going to jump and put his forehead on the rim. So, like, they have a lob threat and they have a post-up threat there. And they've also added Mawat Mag, a transfer out of Rutgers. When he is right and healthy, Now, we haven't seen it very much, but when he is that, he is one of the premier defenders in college basketball as well. And don't forget about some of these other guys. Trevin Knell, fifth-year senior, really good shooter. Richie Saunders, we haven't really seen a ton of him, but when we have, he's been a nice little scoring pop for them. So Trey Stewart, or excuse me, Elijah Crawford is another freshman that I noticed in their scrimmages that I liked him a little bit as a top 100 type of caliber talent. So I like the little supporting cast here, but there's no question, this team will go as far as Igor Demon takes him. And if he is one of the premier playmakers in the sport, like, BYU has a chance to be one of the best top 25 teams in college basketball.
And we're going to talk a lot more about Demon in the coming weeks as we start to break down the top NBA draft prospects in college basketball. But for now, we're going to keep it moving to tier 3. And these are the teams that Trotter dubs preseason as on the bubble. Now, this is a relatively short list. We've got 3 teams: TCU, Arizona State, and West Virginia. We're going to try and keep these 60 seconds or less. Let's go to TCU, where Jamie Dixon, I like what Jamie Dixon's got here. And I'll tell you why, because he's got a point guard and a big man, especially on the defensive end of the floor, who are really reliable. Frankie Collins has bounced around a little bit, but you talk to anybody he's ever played for, and they all speak highly of him, and that is not usually how it goes in this world of roster movement, shall we say. Ernest Uday is someone who defensively is, I think, just phenomenal. So when I think those are the 2 hardest positions to find quality at. When you've got a good point guard, you got a good big man, and you got a coach that is always competitive, always competitive. I think it's a recipe to exceed some expectations. So Trotter, tell me what you like about this group, or where you're at overall with this group.
I like the idea of this group. Yeah, I think that in transition, what an area of the floor that Jamie Dixon has really prioritized lately. He used to play slow, and lately he's just been like, we just got to score in transition. I think you can get there with Frankie Collins being really quick. Trezarian White, a UNC Wilmington transfer, I like him as like one of those like wing handlers who can constantly get rim pressure, but they feel like a guy or two away from me. Like, especially in this Big 12 that feels so top heavy with so many guys coming off the bench that could start for a lot of teams. TCU feels a little light on that depth. It feels like Micah Robinson, a freshman, is going to have to end up being a big piece for them, or maybe an RJ Jones, that transfer out of Kansas State. One of those 2 guys from that wing position needs to step up for this group to really have that pop, because, Noah Reynolds is there, Brendan Wenzel is there. Like, you like some of the pieces, but do they have that absolute certified dude? I don't think we know the answer to that question yet.
So for 3 straight years, they were in the bottom third in college basketball in tempo. Now that flipped dramatically the last 2 years, to your point. And all of a sudden now they're top 50 in 2022-23 and top 65 last year. So they're definitely trying to play much faster. I'm curious to see if they keep that, or, to your point, if they have to kind of extend possessions, make it a lower possession game to try and bridge that talent gap. All right, Arizona State, Bobby Hurley obviously had a rough opener when he went back to Duke for that exhibition game, but there is plenty of young talent here, namely Jaden Quaintance and Josan Sannon. Again, similar question to what I asked you about BYU. Is there enough to support these youngsters? And they're really young. Jaden Quaintance isn't even one and done eligible. He's so young. Is there enough veteran pieces here for those young guys to have a competitor in this league?
Now, I have a lot of questions about this group, and it's easy to say that after what happened yesterday with Duke, but they're a long way away from being really competitive. And I think that it really comes down to defensively. Can they find point of attack defenders that they trust? Do they have enough in that front court depth wise? I like the idea of Jaden Quaintance. I like the idea of Sean Phillips, but we need to see them kind of coalesce together. They tried to play them together at the same time yesterday against Duke. That didn't necessarily go super, super well, but this group needs this backcourt to continue to step up. Alston Mason, a transfer out of Missouri State, he's had pops where he looks like one of the better mid-major guards in college basketball last year. They need a full, consistent version of him. BJ Freeman as well. So there's a lot of questions about if this group can actually find its go-to player. And also there's the continuity here. There's a lot of new pieces kind of fitting into this role. And we know with Bobby Hurley, it's like, if you defend really at a high level, you could do pretty much whatever you want offensively. I'm not sure that recipe necessarily works in college basketball right now.
All right, let's talk about West Virginia. Admittedly, this is a team that I think I'm a little higher on than you. I like DeVries as the head coach there. I think the fact that he brings his son, who I think will be one of the better players in this league, just a potent shot maker, Tucker DeVries at 6'7", and not just a 3-point specialist. I think that may end up what he becomes in the NBA, but at this level, he's someone that can provide a multi-range scoring threat. I really like Javon Small at the point guard. And those are the two that I think everybody agrees like, hey, those two guys are really good. They're a potent 1-2 punch. But Amani Hansberry, who came with Chester Frazier, who was an assistant coach at Illinois last year, he to me is a key to this roster. We're talking about 6'7", extraordinarily long arms, magnetic hands, and a guy who can really pass and create mismatch problems. I think you put him in DeVries's playbook, and all of a sudden he's going to open up a lot of things for them offensively. So this is a team that I think has a chance to come out on the right side of the bubble. But where are you with them?
I'm right there with you. That big three, I think they might have a big three. It's small. It's DeVries and Hansberry. I agree with you. The other X factor for me is Joe Yesufu. The best version of Joe Yesufu that we saw was at Drake, coached by Darian DeVries. So this is a little bit of a reunion for those two guys. They need him to get back to his ways as a double-digit, just shot-making guard. But again, Tucker DeVries, I think he is one of the top 20 players in the sport. Javon Small was one of my favorite transfer portal point guards out there. You put those two together, I'm with you. I think this is a group that, as of today, I would project them to make the NCAA tournament ahead of some of these other teams in Tier 3.
All right, let's talk about Tier 4. This is what Trotter dubs the basement. And it begins with Central Florida, which has maybe the most interesting roster in college basketball. We're talking about Dior Johnson. We're talking about Mikey Williams. We're talking about JJ Taylor. But Trotter, those are the names that people know from recruiting and past headlines and things like that. But who are the most important basketball players when it comes to whether or not this team wins or loses?
Yeah, I got four of them. Darius Johnson, who was a stud guard for them last year and looked like a Big 12 player. Jalen Sellers, the transfer out of Ball State from 2 years ago, who actually turned into a pretty nice player last year. Keyshawn Hall, George Mason transfer. If you're kind of looking for that next Dalton Connect, it's not going to exist. But if there's a guy from that mid-major ranks that can jump up to the high major ranks and put up big points, I think Keyshawn Hall is due for that. And then Mustafa Thiam, the freshman top 50 recruit, they need his rim protection in a really big way. So this is a very odd group. It's a lot of talent. I'm not sure how it melds well together. We've had a lot of off the court issues, but just with like 6 guys on this roster, it just feels like a little bit of a talent grab and hope in God and pray that like everything stays intact. But that's easier said than done in the Big 12. But there's also a world where in 3 months we look at this group and go, hey, like this is a lot more talented than some of the teams ahead of them in this Big 12 pecking order.
And you know what it is too? It's a lot of these guys' last chance. And so that gives Johnny Dawkins a chance to galvanize that and say, hey, we're all in this together. We all need each other to be successful. So they're going to have a rallying cry, but it is potentially combustible. All right, let's talk about Utah. Myro Little joins from Baylor. I think he's going to be a key. I've always liked Gabe Madsden. He was on the draftables for me last year. And then Mike Sharavjants, I'm sure I pronounced that wrong, but I love this guy. I loved him since high school. He's like a big point guard type game. Tell me where you're at with Utah.
Gabe Madsden's a stud. There's only 11 players in college basketball that made 100 threes last year that came back, and Madsden's one of the 11. He's an elite off-movement shooter. I think this group needs to be awesome defensively. Lawson Lovering on that back end, 7'1", 230-pound center. He was really good in rim protection when he was on the floor, but they've lost some really big players. Like, Davon Smith leaving is huge. Carlson heading to the league is a huge loss as well. Again, this team feels a little bit like one piece short. Maybe that's Ezra Asar, the transfer out of East Carolina. They need him to be really, really productive. And they need Little to be like, that Hunter Salas type of jump. We've talked about it a lot this preseason of like a guy who maybe just got buried at his first stop, goes to the second spot, a little bit more opportunity, and starts to live up to that pedigree as a recruit. That's the path for Utah to be really successful this season.
Oklahoma State gets Steve Lutz, who is a proven heck of a basketball coach, great pedigree. They bring Bryce Thompson back. They're going to need a jump for him. But you know what else they need, Trotter? Again, let's just say it plainly. It's great. We can talk about things openly. They need a bigger NIL commitment. If they're going to compete in this league, they've got to have more resources to go out and get players. I don't have any doubt that Steve Lutz is going to overachieve. Like I said, he's a heck of a coach. And they do have some pieces, but they're going to need more long-term.
Definitely. And I think that shows up with their roster right now. I think I buy them from the point of attack defensively. I think they're going to really heat you up. Maybe that's a Devo Davis, Arturo Dean, Khalil Brantley. Those types of guys are going to really get into you. Brandon Newman is another interesting transfer they got from Western Kentucky. I wish they would have gotten a few more of those Western Kentucky transfers because there are some dudes on that roster last year. We saw that in the NCAA tournament. But this front court leaves a little bit to be desired as well. There's just a lot of unproven guys at the high major ranks. And you said it right. Like this looks like a roster that doesn't have the resources that some of its Big 12 rivals kind of have right now.
All right, now let's go to Colorado, and this is a new day there. I mean, this is a vastly different roster for Tad Boyle. You've got him in the basement. Obviously, a lot of guys have moved on. KJ Simpsons, Cody Williams, so many different players. Um, what is a reasonable goal in Colorado this year?
Finishing in the top 100 on KenPom. I think that would be a really positive outcome for this group. Again, this is all about resources. Hey, Coach Prime, like, can we share a little of that NIL pot with the college basketball team? Because like this is kind of what a roster that's put together, where like you just look like a few pieces short compared to some of these other teams. And it's Trevor Baskin, the Division II transfer. Like, can you potentially be a guy this year? Elijah Malone, NAIA transfer. Really like his tape. You see a little bit of that 3-point stroke from him too. I think he might be a stretch 5, but he's dominant down low. And then they need Julian Hammond. He's a guy who's had to kind of sit behind KJ Simpson for a while. There's a little bit of debate for a while, who's better, Hammond or Simpson. Eventually Simpson separated. Now it's Hammond's turn to try to finally be that guy. So those are the type of pieces that they have. But again, like, also losing Tristan da Silva, who is a stud. Like, just some of these losses are really, really hard to overcome. And
Yeah.
And Tad Boyle just doesn't have the money to really, at this point, put together a roster that's even on the similar tier with some of these other teams. I have this team clearly last in the Big 12. Maybe that blows up in my face, but it was not close to find who was 16th in this league.
And I'll also say this, and again, this is not a reflection on Tad Boyle, but around the amount of support around him. Like, if you're going to make that move, understand that this is vastly different. The Big 12 is vastly different than the Pac-12 is. You don't have those 6 to 8 games where you can go in and compete, even if you're in a lower tier NIL category. Like, every game is against let's say this, 90% of the games are against programs that have made a firm commitment to basketball. So if you want to be in this league, you've got to be committed to being in this league 365 days a year, because we've seen that Tad Boyle can get it done when he's got enough weapons at his disposal. All right, everybody, that is it for the Big 12 preview. Remember, you can check all our conference previews right here on the 24/7 Sports channel. You're going to want to keep it locked right here to the 24/7 Sports channel with a number of announcements coming up later this week on the recruiting front. Of course, we always have the latest in both basketball and football announcements and shows. And then, as always, you're going to want to head over to 247sports.com for the latest in recruiting rankings, transfer portal updates, and everything to do with college football and basketball. 247sports.com. I'm Adam Finkelstein for Isaac Trotter. Thanks for joining us.